Hello, my lovely anatomists and physiologists. I jumped ahead in my last video. I said, hey, we're going to talk about the large intestine, but we're not quite ready. Instead, what I want to do is talk about the hormones, and there's quite a few hormones that are involved in regulating the entire GI tract. And what we'll see is the majority of these are going to be produced by duodenal cells, with the exception of gastrin. And so when we've talked about hormones in the past, we've organized them into a table. I wanted to do the same thing here. So we have 4 columns that we need here. And let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows. 8 rows. So the first column is titled hormone. And we're going to have gastrin, motility, enterocrine, secretin, cholecystokinin, GIP, and then there's 2 possible names for this hormone. So you can either call GIP gastric inhibitory peptide, or you can call it glucose dependent insulinotropic peptide. That's informative, but a little bit of a mouthful. And then the last one on our list is vasoactive intestinal peptide. And then your next column is, of course, who makes each hormone. Most of the times it's the duodenum, target tissue, and mechanism of action. So let's see if we can fill in some information here for each of these. So let's begin with gastrin, and let's talk about who makes the gastrin. So gastrin is actually being released, remember we said, by the G cells in the stomach. Sorry about the capitalization. But we'll also see that it's being produced by duodenal cells as well. Primarily, we're going to see gastrin targeting the stomach, but we'll also see it targeting the small intestine and large intestine. When we talk about the mechanism of action for the stomach, it's going to increase production of It's going to increase gastric juices. So here, let's think about hydrochloric acid. Let's think about pepsin. We're also going to see it's going to increase motility. So that is the segmentation, churning movements of the stomach. We see it's increasing the motility of the stomach, the small intestine, and the large intestine. And so here is a very interesting phenomenon. So it's actually the eating of food that then moves food through your whole tract. So when you eat food, it helps to move food through the whole tract. So getting food into your stomach increases the motion of the stomach, but it also increases the activity of the small intestine. Remember, this is a big assembly line. So if you're getting ready to put food from the stomach to the small intestine, you need to move material out of the small intestine into the large intestine. And if you're getting ready to move material into the large intestine, then you have to increase your motility of the large intestine, to make room. You see this especially well for those of you who've taken care of an infant, particularly those first 3 or 4 months. Every time you give that baby milk, you have to change a diaper. So whether you're breastfeeding or giving a bottle, you have to change a diaper every time. And this is why. And then that's true for adults too, but it's just not as fast of a process. Okay, let's look next at the hormone called motility. And here we're going to see this is going to be released by the duodenum. And it's going to be released in response to chyme entering. So we'll see this very often, where it's the movement of material into the duodenum that then triggers the duodenum to release the hormone. Now, this hormone Motility is going to target smooth muscle of the GI tract, and we're going to see it increase peristalsis. So again, we have this same kind of idea, like, okay, if we have something moving into the small intestine, then we're going to be needing to make room along the length of the small intestine, along the length of the large intestine. So it's that moving material through that assembly line. The next one is the Anterocrine, and this one is also released by the duodenum. And again, I think this one is also in response to chyme. So we've had food move into the duodenum. And in this case, we're going to see this is targeting the submucosal glands of the small intestine, and this is going to increase the production of alkaline mucus. So this is going to be some of that bicarbonate rich. You could put this in parentheses if you wanted, bicarbonate rich. Mucus, again, this is important in buffering the acidic chyme that's coming directly from the stomach. Okay. Next one on our list is secretin. And secretin is going to be released by the duodenum in response to chyme. So this is a pattern that we're seeing. And this time, we're going to be targeting the pancreas. We're going to be targeting the stomach. And we're going to be targeting the liver. Now, when we talk to the pancreas, we're going to trigger release of bicarbonate rich pancreatic juices. And so this is going to be important in also helping to buffer, because we have that really acidic pH in the stomach, and then in the small intestine we need it to be more of an alkaline pH, and so we have to buffer and also raise the pH. We're going to see that we're going to decrease stomach motility, and then we're also going to increase bile production at the liver. Okay, so let's talk about this for just a few minutes. Decreasing stomach motility. Now we're getting into that story of that I Love Lucy. So remember, on some level, just food entering into the tract tells us, okay, we need to move things along the assembly line, right? So we said like material entering the stomach is going to increase movement in both the stomach, small and large intestine. But then we've also said that we're releasing, I like to think of it as a squirt. So we're releasing like these 3 milliliter squirts at a time, and we need to sort of then slow that down. So once we get that 3 milliliter squirt into the small intestine, we need time to process. So we're going to tell the stomach, like, wait, give me a chance to digest and absorb these nutrients, and then we'll have a trigger to release another 3 milliliter squirt. Bile, we're going to see, is important in helping us to digest our lipids. And bile is being made by the liver, and then we'll see stored and concentrated in the gallbladder. So we'll be picking up those details a little bit more here, and then as we progress through. So you can make space in your notes if you want to come back and add that in. The next hormone I have listed is cholecystokinin, and this one is abbreviated CCK. Remember, anytime we have a hormone abbreviation, we should know it just as well as we know the full name. Cholecystokinin, or CCK, is going to be released by the duodenum. And this time, it's not just in response to chyme, but it's in response to chyme that's high in fats, lipids, and carbs. And I'm just going to All right, the whole word out because it won't matter. High in both lipids and carbohydrates. Okay. So CCK, we'll see, is talking to several tissues. It's talking to the pancreas. It's talking to the stomach. It's talking to the gallbladder. And also the central nervous system. Okay, When CCK talks to the pancreas, it's gonna release enzyme-rich pancreatic juices. Okay, and so what we're going to see is the pancreas is making both what we're going to call pancreatic lipase and pancreatic amylase. And so if we're getting both these lipids and carbohydrates into the small intestine, we need to be able to continue and get real serious about digesting those. We'll also see that CCK will enhance the activity of secretin. So that's the hormone we just talked about up above. Okay, so it's kind of doing a helper sort of action with the pancreas. We're going to see it's going to release bile salts from the gallbladder. And then we'll see it's going to decrease stomach motility. And then we see it's going to also decrease hunger. So that's what it's doing with them. I'm going to put CNS in parentheses so we get that particular connection clear. So remember, this is a hormone, which means it has to, first of all, the material has to go from the mouth to the pharynx, to the esophagus, to the stomach, squirt into the duodenum. The duodenum has to detect that it's a meal high in lipids and carbohydrates, then signal the duodenum to release CCK, and the CCK then has to move into the bloodstream until it gets to these cells of the CNS that we interpret as, oh, I'm feeling full. So clearly it's going to take some time. And everything I've read says that it takes about 15 minutes of time for you to realize you're full. So the recommendation is, eat a decent sized plate, wait 15 minutes before you see if you need a second portion. Okay, next up is the GIP, which I've put in bold because then you get to choose what that stands for. We're going to see it listed two ways. It can be listed either gastric inhibitory peptide, or OpenStax refers to it more as the glucose dependent insulinotropic, which twists up my tongue, peptide. Okay, so I'm going to call it GIP just to be short, easy, and clear. And we're going to see this one is also released, of course, by the duodenum. We're picking up on that pattern. And this one is actually released for both fats and carbohydrates. So if you go back up to the CCK, I do need to remove the carbohydrate from the list there. So it's primarily looking at a release when it's high in fat. So just draw a line through that or erase that. I apologize. When we're looking at the GIP, this is in response to both chyme high in fats and carbohydrates. I had just looked at my paper a little bit wrong. And so here we're going to talk to the pancreas and we're going to talk to the stomach. And for the pancreas, let's go ahead and put in parentheses beta cells, and we'll see why we want to be that specific over here. So with the GIP, gastric inhibitory is really a nice description because that's telling us, okay, we're going to decrease stomach motility. We're going to tell the stomach stop working. This is, again, that assembly line. We don't want to be overwhelmed. We want plenty of time to digest and absorb our nutrients. And then the other name, the glucose-dependent insulinotropic peptide, is telling us about increasing release of insulin. And remember, insulin is being released by the beta cells in the pancreas. We talked about that during the endocrine system. I think at that point, I let you know, like, hey, that's going to be a final exam question. So again, we're making sure we know which cells of the pancreas make insulin. And when we talk about insulin, I'm going to go ahead here and put that in bold. And then I'm going to put some parentheses with information about insulin, where this is going to increase the glucose uptake by cells. This is going to increase the triglyceride synthesis by cells. And this is also going to increase glucose use in skeletal muscle. And we'll come back and talk about these things again a little bit more. We've talked about insulin already in the endocrine system when we talked about diabetes and the regulation of glucose. So this should be some repeat information for you. The last one on our list is the vasoactive intestinal peptide, which we can abbreviate as GIP. And this one is released by the duodenum in response to chyme. So we're back to that pattern of chyme enters the duodenum, and the duodenum is like, oh, and then it releases some hormone. And this time we're going to talk to the smooth muscle, we're going to talk to the pancreas, and we're going to talk to the stomach. And when we talk to the smooth muscle, what we're going to do is dilate your peripheral blood vessels, vasoactive, that makes sense. So you're going to increase blood flow. This should make sense. We're getting ready to absorb a whole bunch of nutrients, and that's happening with the bloodstream. So we want that blood to come here to this particular area. We also see that this is helping to relax some smooth muscle in the GI tract. We're going to stimulate pancreatic secretion. And we're going to decrease stomach activity. All right, y'all, let's do a couple things. One thing is, hey, let's identify like all of these just about our duodenum. It's only our gastrin that was duodenum and stomach. So the rest of these you can think about like, oh, these are coming from the duodenum. And then let's also emphasize most of these we're going to decrease the stomach activity. Again, that's this idea of like, hey, we need time to be able to process this nutrient. All right, y'all. Stay tuned. I think we are next actually ready for large intestine. And as always, take care of yourselves and each other.